September 19, 1944. Near the village of Aricourt in northeastern France, Sergeant James Cotter's M4 Sherman lurched to a violent stop. An 88mm round from a German Panther tank had torn through the engine compartment, ripping through coolant lines and igniting a small fire. Inside the cramped turret, Cotter could hear the sickening hiss of steam and smell burning oil. His gunner, Corporal Mike Russo, looked at him with wide eyes. Standard procedure said they should bail out. The tank was finished. But Cotter had other ideas. While German panzer crews watched through their periscopes from 800 yards away, expecting the Americans to abandon their burning Sherman and retreat, something impossible happened instead. The American crew didn't run. They grabbed tools from the sponson boxes, killed the engine, and started working. Within 20 minutes, impossibly, smoke stopped billowing from the engine deck. 25 minutes. The Sherman's engine roared back to life. The German tank commander couldn't believe what he was seeing. His own Panther, despite being technically superior, would have required an entire recovery team, a workshop, and probably 2 days to fix comparable damage. Yet here were 5 American tankers performing battlefield surgery under fire, and now that Sherman was moving again. Turret traversing, gun elevating, coming straight at them. What the Germans witnessed that day wasn't just battlefield resourcefulness. It was the culmination of a design philosophy that would fundamentally change armored warfare. While Germany built complicated, over-engineered monsters that required specialized crews and rear-echelon workshops, America built something radically different. A tank designed not just to fight, but to be fixed quickly, simply, by ordinary soldiers with basic tools. This is the story of how American engineering philosophy, crew training, and a modular maintenance system created a weapon that German tankers came to fear, not because it was invincible, but because it wouldn't stay dead. To understand why that scene near Aricourt was so shocking to German observers, we need to rewind to 1940 and examine 2 completely opposite approaches to tank design. When German engineers sat down to design tanks, they brought with them a tradition of precision engineering that dated back to the Industrial Revolution. German tanks were marvels of technical sophistication: high-quality steel, precision-machined parts, advanced optics, powerful guns. The Panther tank that appeared in 1943 was in many ways the most balanced tank design of the war: sloped armor, excellent gun, decent mobility. The Tiger tank mounted an 88mm gun that could kill any Allied tank from ranges exceeding a mile. But this sophistication came at a brutal cost. A Panther tank used interleaved road wheels, overlapping wheels that provided excellent ride quality, but became a maintenance nightmare. If the innermost wheel on one side broke, mechanics had to remove up to 15 other wheels to reach it. In the frozen mud of the Eastern Front, this overlapping design would freeze solid overnight, immobilizing entire tank companies until crews could chip away the ice with blowtorches and hammers. A job that might take hours in perfect conditions could take days in combat. The Tiger was even worse. Weighing 56 tons, it required specialized rail cars for transport, special bridges, and consumed fuel at a rate that limited its operational range to barely 60 miles under combat conditions. Transmission failures were endemic. Some Tigers broke down before ever seeing combat. And when they did break down, they required complete engine removal just to replace certain components. According to post-war German maintenance reports, the average Panther required major mechanical attention every 14 hours of operation. Not 14 hours of combat, 14 hours of running. And major mechanical attention meant towing it to a rear echelon workshop, where skilled mechanics with proper tools and parts could spend days bringing it back to operational status. Now let's cross the Atlantic to Detroit, Michigan, where a completely different philosophy was taking shape. When American engineers at Chrysler, Ford, and Fisher Body received contracts to design a medium tank, they brought with them experience from the automobile industry. These weren't weapons designers. They were the people who had revolutionized mass production with the assembly line, who had figured out how to build millions of cars with interchangeable parts that could be maintained by ordinary mechanics at gas stations across America. The M4 Sherman that emerged from this thinking looked, to European eyes, almost crude. The armor was welded or cast, not the precision-fitted plates of German tanks. The drivetrain used modified truck and aviation components. The gun, initially a 75mm, was adequate but not exceptional. German tank engineers who examined captured Shermans were actually puzzled by some of the simplified construction techniques. But what they missed was the genius in that simplicity. Every major component in a Sherman was designed to be modular and quickly replaceable. The engine sat on a removable tray system. The transmission was mounted so it could be pulled without disassembling half the tank. The tracks were held together by simple end connectors that could be removed with a sledgehammer and drift punch. One crew that trained extensively could change a Sherman's entire engine in 8 hours, something that would take days for a Panther and was nearly impossible in field conditions for a Tiger. The American Ordnance Department mandated that 80% of battlefield repairs should be completable by the tank crew using only the tools carried in the tank's sponson boxes, not by specialized mechanics, not in workshops, by 5 soldiers, a commander, gunner, loader, driver, and assistant driver with hammers, wrenches, and spare parts. Did you know that every Sherman carried a comprehensive toolkit that included not just basic tools, but items like track pins, spare road wheels, and even a complete track repair kit? German tanks carried basic tools, but complex repairs required specialized equipment that lived in maintenance units far behind the lines. The difference became doctrine. American armored divisions didn't just have fighting battalions, they had elaborate maintenance echelons that could move with the combat units. Light maintenance companies traveled directly behind the tanks. Medium maintenance companies stayed a few miles back with more extensive equipment. Heavy maintenance battalions operated mobile, workshops that could fabricate parts if necessary. But it was the crew-level maintenance that made the difference. American tankers were trained obsessively on their vehicles' mechanical systems. Before they ever fired the main gun in anger, they'd spent hundreds of hours learning how to maintain every component. They knew how to time the engine's magnetos, how to track tension should feel, how to identify the sound of a bearing about to fail. This wasn't academic knowledge, it was muscle memory. Meanwhile, German tank crews received excellent tactical training but much less emphasis on maintenance. The German system assumed that damaged tanks would be recovered by dedicated maintenance units. There were good reasons for this. German tanks were more complex and required more specialized knowledge. But in the chaos of mobile warfare, this became a fatal weakness. When a Panther threw a track in combat, the crew's only option was to abandon it and call for recovery. When a Sherman threw a track, the crew could have it repaired and the tank moving again in under an hour. This wasn't theoretical. This was the reality of armored warfare in 1944, and it was about to become devastatingly clear on the battlefields of France. By September 1944, General George S. Patton's Third Army was tearing across France at a pace that shocked everyone, including Patton himself. The 4th Armored Division, nicknamed Patton's Vanguard, had landed in Normandy on July 11th and immediately lived up to its reputation. Within weeks, they'd helped break out of the bocage hedgerows, raced across France, and now threatened the German border itself. But the German High Command wasn't ready to concede Lorraine. The region was crucial. It guarded the approaches to the Saar industrial region and ultimately Germany itself. In mid-September, the 5th Panzer Army assembled a counteroffensive force near the town of Aricourt. The force was formidable. Elements of the 111th and 113th Panzer Brigades, plus portions of the veteran 11th Panzer Division, over 250 tanks and assault guns, including roughly 100 of the feared Panther tanks. On paper, the Germans had qualitative superiority. The Panther's 75mm high-velocity gun could penetrate a Sherman's frontal armor at 2,000 yards. A Sherman 75mm gun had to get within 500 yards, sometimes closer, to reliably penetrate a Panther's sloped frontal armor. The Panther was faster, better armored, and mounted superior optics. The 4th Armored Division's Combat Command A, defending the Aricourt sector, had approximately 40 Sherman tanks. They were outnumbered 6-1 in the sector where the Germans would attack. The Germans expected a decisive victory. What they got instead was 12 days of brutal combat that would fundamentally demonstrate something German tankers had been slowly learning since Normandy. Technical superiority doesn't win battles alone. The Battle of Aricourt began on September 18th with German armored columns advancing in thick morning fog. The weather was perfect for an attack. Visibility dropped to barely 100 yards, negating American advantages in artillery and air support. German commanders were confident. That confidence lasted until the fog lifted around mid-morning. American tank destroyers and Shermans had used the fog to maneuver into ambush positions on the German flanks. When visibility improved, they opened fire at point-blank range under 500 yards, where Sherman guns were lethal even against Panthers. The Germans, expecting a defensive line they could hammer with long-range fire, suddenly found themselves in a close-quarters brawl. The first day's fighting was chaotic and brutal. Both sides took losses. But here's where the maintenance story becomes crucial. As the sun set on September 18th, the Americans counted their damaged tanks. 12 Shermans knocked out or disabled. The Germans had lost approximately 35 tanks and assault guns. Those numbers alone don't tell the real story. That night, American recovery teams went to work. Tank retrievers, M32 recovery vehicles that were basically Shermans with cranes, moved forward to pull damaged tanks back to collection points. Maintenance crews swarmed over the wounded vehicles. By dawn on September 19th, 8 of those 12 knocked-out Shermans were back in action. Some had received new engines. Others had damaged armor plates cut away and replaced. One had been hit 3 separate times but required only track repairs and replacement of damaged external equipment. The Germans recovered only 7 of their 35 lost vehicles, and only 3 of those would see combat again before the battle ended. This pattern repeated itself every single day of the battle. Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams, yes, the same Abrams whose name would later grace America's main battle tank, commanded the 37th Tank Battalion during Aricourt. His after-action reports document the maintenance miracle in stark terms. On September 20th, one of his companies lost 5 tanks to German fire. By September 21st, 4 of those 5 were back in his formation. One had taken an 88-meter round straight through the engine compartment. The crew had extinguished the fire, replaced the damaged oil cooler with a spare from their maintenance truck, patched coolant lines, and had the tank operational in under 4 hours. 4 hours. A Panther with similar damage would have been out of action for days, assuming parts were even available. Did you know that American armored divisions maintained what they called floater tanks, spare vehicles that would be issued to crews whose tanks were undergoing repairs, so the crew could stay in combat? German units had no such system. A crew whose tank was down simply waited, sometimes for weeks. While the tank was repaired or a replacement arrived from Germany, the Germans began to notice something unnerving. They would destroy American tanks in combat, only to face what seemed like the exact same tanks the next day. Was American production so massive they could replace losses overnight? Some German intelligence reports from September 1944 actually reflect this confusion. They couldn't understand how American tank strength remained so consistent, despite confirmed kills. The answer wasn't magical production, it was maintenance. But the real shock came from something German observers found almost incomprehensible: battlefield repairs under fire. On September 22nd, during heavy fighting near the village of Reshicourt, a Sherman from C Company, 37th Tank Battalion took a hit that disabled its left track and damaged the suspension. The tank was stranded in an exposed position with German tanks less than a kilometer away. Standard doctrine for both armies said the crew should abandon the vehicle and withdraw. Staff Sergeant Robert Early had different ideas, while his gunner and loader kept watch and occasionally fired the main gun to discourage German approach. Early and his driver climbed out and began repairs. Under sporadic machine gun fire, they removed the damaged track sections, replaced a broken support roller, and reconnected the track. The entire repair took 38 minutes. A German tank commander from the 111th Panzer Brigade later recalled in a post-war interview, "We couldn't understand it. The American tank was clearly disabled. We expected them to abandon it. Instead, they stayed with their vehicle and performed repairs we could only do in a workshop, and they did it while we shot at them. Then the tank moved and they drove it backward to safety while still firing at us. This was not supposed to be possible. This scene repeated across the battlefield. American crews developed techniques for emergency repairs that became legendary. They'd use spare track blocks as makeshift armor patches. They jury-rigged damaged cooling systems using canteen water. They carried extra road wheels and would swap them out in minutes. One crew famously used a broken German tank as cover while they replaced their entire transmission in the field, a repair that should have required a workshop. The psychological impact on German tankers was significant. Panzer crews were trained to think of tanks as sophisticated war machines that required expert care. The idea that you could fix critical damage with a hammer and some wire in the middle of a firefight was foreign to their entire conception of armored warfare. But let's be clear about something. This wasn't some kind of American mechanical wizardry. It was the result of deliberate design choices and training. The Sherman's modular construction meant most repairs involved unbolting a damaged component and bolting on a replacement. The German Panther's construction meant repairs often required precise fitting, shimming, and adjustment. The Sherman used commercial standard fasteners. You could replace bolts from spare parts without worrying about thread pitch variations. German tanks used metric precision fasteners that weren't always interchangeable between production batches. American maintenance manuals were written in plain English with illustrated step-by-step instructions. German technical manuals assumed the reader had mechanical engineering knowledge. An American tank driver with a high school education could perform repairs that required a certified mechanic in the German system. The weather became another factor. As September turned colder and wetter, mechanical reliability became crucial. Sherman engines, primarily radial aircraft engines or GAA V8 engines, started reliably in the cold. Panther engines, particularly the early Maybach HL230 models, had temperamental fuel injection systems that struggled in cold weather. American crews could conduct maintenance in rain and mud because the Sherman's components were accessible. German crews needed dry conditions and proper tools for many repairs. By September 25th, the Battle of Aricourt was effectively over. The Germans had lost somewhere between 200 and 250 tanks and assault guns. The exact number is still debated by historians. The 4th Armored Division had lost 25 Shermans, but here's the stunning part. Of those 25 losses, only 14 were complete write-offs. The other 11 were repaired and returned to service. Of the 200-plus German tank losses, fewer than 30 would ever fight again. The German 5th Panzer Army was shattered as an offensive force. The 111th and 113th Panzer Brigades were disbanded due to unsustainable losses. The counter-offensive that was supposed to stop Patton's advance had instead been destroyed. But what shocked German officers most wasn't the tactical defeat. They'd experienced plenty of those by late 1944. What shocked them was the maintenance disparity. German after-action reports from Aricourt explicitly mention their inability to recover and repair damaged tanks as a critical factor in the defeat. They watched American recovery vehicles operate almost casually near the front lines, pulling back damaged Shermans like tow trucks retrieving cars from a parking lot. German recovery and maintenance units, by contrast, needed secure rear areas, time, and specialized equipment. Every tank they lost in combat was likely lost permanently, unless they controlled the battlefield long enough for recovery, which at Aricourt they rarely did. Otto Carius, a legendary German tank ace who fought on the Eastern Front but knew comrades from the Western Front, later wrote, "The Americans had an entirely different concept of armored warfare than we did. They understood that availability was more important than individual superiority. A tank that breaks down before reaching the battle is worthless, regardless of how powerful its gun is." This wasn't just about one battle. Across the European theater in late 1944, American armored divisions were consistently maintaining operational readiness rates of 85 to 90%. German panzer divisions were lucky to maintain 50% readiness and often operated at 30% or less. The reasons were complex: supply issues, lack of spare parts, insufficient maintenance personnel. But the baseline problem was simple. German tanks were too complex to maintain in field conditions. Did you know that American tank crews were so confident in their ability to repair their vehicles that they developed an informal motto? If it breaks, fix it. If it's destroyed, salvage it. If it's missing, improvise it. This mindset was completely foreign to German tank doctrine. The maintenance advantage wasn't sexy. It didn't make for dramatic combat footage, but it was decisive. An army of technically superior tanks that can't stay in the fight will lose to an army of adequate tanks that can. And German officers were beginning to understand this terrible truth. The moment that would crystallize the maintenance disparity, and the story that would spread through German tank units like wildfire, happened on September 26th, during the final phase of the Aricourt battle. First Lieutenant Frank Gresh commanded a platoon of Sherman tanks from B Company, 35th Tank Battalion, 4th Armored Division. His tank, a battle-worn M4A1 he'd named Cobra, had survived 3 weeks of near-constant combat. On the morning of the 26th, his platoon was ordered to probe German positions near Moncourt Woods, where remnants of the 11th Panzer Division had established defensive positions. The morning was cold, with ground fog still lingering in low areas. Grech's platoon, 5 Shermans, moved cautiously along a sunken farm road. They'd gone perhaps 2 kilometers when German guns opened fire from concealed positions. In a tree line 700 yards away, the lead Sherman exploded immediately, an 80 Needham armor-piercing round through the front glasses, killing the driver instantly. The second tank lurched backward as its driver reversed frantically. Grech's Cobra took a hit to the right front hull that penetrated the welded armor, destroyed the transmission, and set fire to hydraulic fluid. The tank stopped dead. "Bail out," Grech ordered. His crew scrambled from the disabled Sherman and took cover in a drainage ditch 30 yards away. German machine gun fire kicked up dirt around them, but the sunken road provided decent cover. The remaining 2 Shermans in the platoon withdrew to a reverse slope position and began returning fire, trying to suppress the German guns. This should have been the end of Cobra's story. A knocked-out Sherman, burning in no man's land between the lines. Standard procedure said to mark its position and let recovery units retrieve it after the battle, if possible. But Grech looked at his tank and saw something different. The fire in the transmission compartment had already burned itself out. There simply wasn't much combustible material there. The engine was still intact. The turret systems were undamaged. The gun could still fire. The only critical damage was to the transmission and final drive system. "It's not that bad," he said to his crew. His assistant driver, Corporal James Chen, stared at him like he'd lost his mind. "Sir, the transmission is wrecked. We need to pull it and replace it. We have spares in the maintenance truck. The maintenance truck is 2 miles back, and there's a German 88 pointing straight at us. Then we better work fast." What happened next was recorded in both American after-action reports and, remarkably, in a German situation report filed by Hauptmann Walter Rosen, the German company commander whose guns had disabled the Sherman, while the 2 remaining Shermans from Grech's platoon laid down covering fire and, crucially, while American artillery began dropping smoke rounds to obscure the German line of sight, Grech sent a runner back to bring up their maintenance half-track. The runner made it, though he earned a Purple Heart for shrapnel wounds during the trip. The M3 half-track arrived with Staff Sergeant Arnold Martinez, the company's senior mechanic, and 2 maintenance specialists. They brought a replacement transmission, a hydraulic jack, tool kits, and, critically, a portable welding set. "You want us to replace the transmission here?" Martinez asked, surveying the exposed position. "I want my tank back in this fight," Grech replied. Martinez looked at the disabled Sherman, at the German position 700 yards away, at the smoke obscuring the area that would eventually dissipate. He did a mental calculation about time, difficulty, and survival odds. 2 hours, he said. Maybe less if we rush, but rushing means we'll probably screw something up. You've got 90 minutes before this smoke clears completely. After that, we're going to take direct fire. Martinez nodded. Then we better get started. What followed was one of the most remarkable battlefield repair operations of the entire war. The crew jacked up the front of the Sherman using the recovery equipment from the half-track. They disconnected the drive shaft coolant lines and control linkages. The damaged transmission, weighing over 300 pounds, was unbolted and lowered out of the tank. The replacement was lifted into position using the half-track's winch system and human muscle. Bolts were threaded, linkages reconnected, fluids added. All of this happened with sporadic German machine gun fire impacting around them. At one point, a German mortar barrage forced the crew to take cover for several minutes. When the barrage ended, they went straight back to work. The German tank commander watching this scene unfold was utterly baffled. Hauptmann Rosen's post-battle report, captured by American intelligence after the war, contained this passage. The American tank crew performed what appeared to be a major mechanical repair to their disabled vehicle while under our fire. This is contrary to all tactical doctrine and seemed suicidal. We expected them to abandon the vehicle. Instead, they worked on it methodically, as if they were in a rear area workshop rather than an active combat zone. Our machine gun fire seemed insufficient to deter them, and their smokescreen made aimed anti-tank fire impossible. The discipline and technical skill required for such an operation is noteworthy. 83 minutes after they started, 7 minutes ahead of schedule, Martinez fired up the Sherman's Continental R975 radial engine. It roared to life on the second try. The transmission engaged smoothly. Gresh climbed back into the commander's position. His crew mounted up and Cobra backed away from its exposed position under its own power. As the Sherman withdrew, its gun was still operational. Grech's gunner, Sergeant Tom Kowalski, fired 3 high-explosive rounds at the German positions before they moved out of range. It was a gesture, a mechanical middle finger to the Germans who'd thought they'd knocked out the tank permanently. The German observers were stunned. Rosen's report continued. The American tank that we disabled in the morning was observed moving under its own power by 1430 hours, approximately 90 minutes after the disabling hit. Either American industrial production has achieved near instantaneous replacement capability, or they possess battlefield repair abilities that far exceed our own. I believe the latter explanation is more likely, which presents troubling implications for sustained combat operations. That last sentence is important. Rosen understood immediately what many German officers were slow to recognize. This wasn't about a single remarkable repair. This was a systemic advantage. The story of Cobra's resurrection spread through both armies. American tankers loved it. It validated their training and reinforced their confidence that a disabled tank didn't mean a dead tank. German tankers found it deeply unsettling. The idea that Americans could perform workshop-level repairs under fire challenged their understanding of armored combat. But the truly revolutionary moment came during the final days of the Aracourt battle, when German intelligence officers compiled their analysis of the engagement. Among the captured documents recovered after the war was a September 30th intelligence summary from the 5th Panzer Army headquarters. The document analyzed the American 4th Armored Division's capabilities and identified several factors that contributed to German defeat. One section dealt specifically with maintenance. The enemy demonstrates superior battlefield maintenance and recovery capability. American tank crews regularly perform repairs that our doctrine considers possible only in established workshops. Their recovery vehicles operate aggressively close to the combat zone. Enemy tanks that appeared destroyed return to combat within hours. This capability allows the Americans to maintain force strength despite losses. Our own forces lack equivalent capability due to vehicle complexity and insufficient forward maintenance organization. The strategic implications are significant. In sustained combat operations, American armored units can maintain operational strength while our own units deteriorate through attrition of repairable vehicles. This was from a German intelligence summary in September 1944. The German military was explicitly acknowledging that American maintenance superiority was a strategic-level problem, not just a tactical inconvenience. The section concluded with a recommendation. Future armored vehicle designs must prioritize maintainability and crew-level repair capability over technical sophistication. That recommendation would never be implemented. By the time this report was written, Germany had 9 months left in the war and no capacity to redesign its armored force. But the acknowledgement was remarkable. German engineering, renowned for its sophistication and technical achievement, had been beaten by American simplicity and practicality. Lieutenant Grech and Cobra would survive the war. The tank fought through the Battle of the Bulge in December 1944, where Grech's unit helped relieve Bastogne. Cobra was hit twice more during the Bulge, and both times the crew performed field repairs and got it running again. By the time the war ended in May 1945, the Sherman had been through 37 separate repair operations. 11 of them performed under combat conditions by the crew and immediate maintenance support. The tank that supposedly couldn't compete with German armor had proven something more important. It could be kept fighting, and in total war, availability beats sophistication. The Battle of Aracourt became a case study taught at U.S. Army schools after the war, not because of brilliant tactics or heroic last stands, but because it demonstrated the decisive importance of logistics and maintenance in armored warfare. The Germans had technically superior tanks and experienced crews. They lost because they couldn't keep their tanks in the fight. But here's what makes this story even more significant. The maintenance advantage wasn't limited to tank warfare. American trucks, artillery, aircraft, all were designed with the same philosophy of simplicity, modularity, and field repairability. German equivalents were often technically superior but mechanically fragile. The pattern repeated across every mechanized system in the American arsenal. The Sherman itself has an interesting reputation today. Many people know it as the tank that couldn't go head-to-head with a Panther or Tiger. Fewer people know that Sherman operational readiness rates were typically double those of Panthers, or that the average Sherman that survived the war had been repaired and returned to service an average of 4.2 times. The crews who fought in Shermans understood this. They weren't delusional about their tank's limitations. They knew a Panther had a better gun. They knew a Tiger had heavier armor. But they also knew that when their tank broke down, not if, but when, they could probably fix it and get back in the fight. German crews had no such confidence, and that psychological edge mattered. The maintenance story of World War II didn't end with Aricourt, but that battle became emblematic of a larger truth that would shape the rest of the war. By October 1944, German armored forces in the West were shadows of their former strength. Not primarily because they'd been destroyed in combat, though they had suffered heavy losses, but because they simply couldn't maintain their vehicles. Panther tanks were abandoned due to minor mechanical failures that could have been repaired if the proper parts and expertise were available. Tiger tanks were destroyed by their own crews when recovery wasn't possible. The German retreat across France left a trail of abandoned armor that bore testament to maintenance breakdown. American armored divisions, by contrast, grew stronger as the campaign progressed. The 4th Armored Division that fought at Aricourt maintained operational tank strength above 90% for most of the autumn campaign. They weren't replacing losses with new tanks from America. Those took weeks to arrive. They were recovering and repairing battlefield casualties. The numbers are striking. Between D-Day on June 6, 1944 and the German surrender in May 1945, the United States produced approximately 17,000 Sherman tanks. But American armored divisions in Europe fielded a combined total of about 6,000 tanks at any given time. If you do the math, that suggests massive losses, 11,000 tanks destroyed or replaced. Except that's not what happened. The actual number of Sherman tanks completely destroyed and unrecoverable in the European theater was approximately 2,300. The remaining 14,700 tanks that were produced either stayed in training, were shipped to other theaters, or replaced the rotating repair cycle. A Sherman would fight, get damaged, go to repair, return to service, fight again, get damaged again, get repaired again. Some individual Shermans went through this cycle 6 or 7 times. German Panthers and Tigers didn't have this resilience. Once seriously damaged, they were usually permanent losses. Lieutenant Colonel Crichton Abrams, who commanded tank battalions at Aricourt and later during the Battle of the Bulge, summarized it perfectly in a 1945 report. The Germans have better individual tanks. We have better tank divisions. The difference is we can keep our tanks running. After the war, U.S. Army investigators interviewed German tank commanders and maintenance officers. The recurring theme in these interviews was German frustration with their own maintenance system. Oberst Colonel Franz Becke, a highly decorated panzer commander, told his interrogators, "Your Sherman was a mediocre tank made excellent by your ability to keep it functioning. Our Panther was an excellent tank made mediocre by our inability to keep it running." The German General Heinz Guderian, essentially the father of German armored doctrine, had actually warned about this problem before the war. In 1938, he advocated for simpler tank designs that could be maintained in field conditions. He was overruled by engineers and officials who prioritized technical performance. By 1944, Guderian's warnings had proven prophetic, but it was too late to change course. Did you know that American maintenance units actually wrote simplified technical manuals in the field to supplement official Army documentation? These crew-level guides used simple language and cartoon illustrations to explain repairs. Some German prisoners of war, who saw these manuals, expressed astonishment that American soldiers were expected to understand and perform such tasks without formal mechanical education. The men who performed these maintenance miracles came from everywhere. Staff Sergeant Arnold Martinez, the mechanic who replaced Cobra's transmission under fire, had been a farm equipment mechanic in California before the war. Sergeant Frank Mallory, who famously jury-rigged a damaged Sherman engine using parts from a destroyed Panther, had worked in his father's garage in Iowa. Corporal James Chin, the assistant driver who helped repair Cobra, had been a college student studying mechanical engineering before he enlisted. This was the genius of American mobilization, taking ordinary people, training them intensively, and trusting them to maintain complex systems in chaotic conditions. It worked because the systems were designed to be maintained by ordinary people. The war ended in May 1945. Germany surrendered, and the American armored divisions rolled to a stop deep inside German territory. The Shermans that made it to VE Day were battered, repaired, rebuilt, and exhausted.
Many had nicknames painted on their hulls, along with impressive kill tallies and mission markings.
But more impressive than any kill count was the simple fact they'd survived. Not because they were invincible, but because they kept getting back up. General George S. Patton, never one for understatement, said this about the Sherman in a December 1945 speech. The Sherman tank was not the best tank of the war, but it was the best tank for the war. It ran when it needed to, fought when it had to, and came back from repairs when everyone else's tanks stayed broken. The human cost of armored warfare deserves acknowledgement. American tankers had an approximately 80% survival rate, relatively good compared to other combat arms, but still representing thousands of killed and wounded. Each destroyed tank was a potential catastrophe for the crew inside. The emphasis on maintenance and recovery wasn't just about keeping equipment functional, it was about bringing crews home alive. German tankers had a lower survival rate, particularly in the war's final year. Part of this was due to the fact damaged tanks often couldn't be recovered, forcing crews to abandon vehicles in exposed positions or, worse, remain with disabled tanks that became targets. The men who maintained the tanks rarely received recognition. There were no headlines about mechanics, no medals for transmission replacements. The combat tankers got the glory, which was fair. They faced the direct fire. But armored warfare was a team effort, and the maintenance crews were essential team members. After the war, many of these men went home and never talked about their service. Staff Sergeant Martinez opened a garage in Fresno and worked there for 35 years. Lieutenant Grech became a high school principal in Pennsylvania. Corporal Chen finished his engineering degree and worked for General Motors. They'd been part of a revolution in military maintenance that would influence how armies fought for the next 80 years. But most never thought of it that way. They'd just done their jobs. The Sherman tank itself became history's most produced tank, with over 50,000 units built in various models. It fought in every theater of the war. It served with a dozen allied nations. After WE, upgraded Shermans saw combat in Korea, the Middle East, and various regional conflicts well into the 1970s. No other tank of its generation had such longevity, and the reason was simple: it was maintainable. The German Panthers and Tigers, despite their fearsome reputation, disappeared almost immediately after the war. They were too complex, too fuel-hungry, too maintenance-intensive to be useful in peacetime armies. The few that survived became museum pieces. Today, hundreds of Sherman tanks still exist, many in running condition. There are operating Shermans in military museums, private collections, and even a few still on active military rosters for training purposes. They run because they were designed to be kept running. There's a Sherman tank at the American Heritage Museum in Massachusetts that still has its original repair log from World War II. The log documents 23 separate repair operations between July 1944 and May 1945. Reading through it is like watching the entire maintenance philosophy in action. Track replacements, engine work, transmission swaps, electrical repairs, armor patching. Each entry notes the repair time, usually measured in hours, sometimes in days for major work, but never the weeks that German tanks required. The tank survives. The men who maintained it are mostly gone now. They'd be over 100 years old, but their legacy lives on in every military maintenance manual, in every modular system design, in every philosophy that prioritizes availability over perfection. The story of the Sherman tank and American battlefield maintenance teaches us something profound about how wars are actually won. It's tempting to focus on the dramatic, the biggest gun, the thickest armor, the most advanced technology. Those things matter. But sustainable combat power requires something less glamorous. The ability to keep fighting when things break, the discipline to maintain equipment under pressure, the engineering philosophy that values simplicity and reliability over sophistication. The Germans built technically superior tanks and lost the maintenance war. The Americans built adequate tanks and won the availability war. History remembers this as a victory of production and logistics, which is true. But at the tactical level, it was a victory of soldiers with wrenches over soldiers with excuses. Consider what that German intelligence officer wrote at Aricourt. Enemy tanks that appeared destroyed returned to combat within hours. That sentence captures the essence of American armor doctrine in World War II. It wasn't about building invincible machines. It was about building resilient systems. Machines that could be maintained, crews that could be trained, organizations that could sustain combat power over months of continuous operation. The modern U.S. military still follows these principles. The M1 Abrams tank, named after that same Crichton Abrams who fought at Aricourt, features modular power pack systems that can be swapped in the field. Modern Army maintenance doctrine emphasizes crew-level repairs for routine problems and rapid repair and return cycles for battle damage. The lessons learned by tank crews in 1944 remain relevant in 2025. But perhaps the most important lesson is about human ingenuity under pressure. When Sergeant Martinez replaced a transmission under fire in 90 minutes, he wasn't following a specific drill he'd practiced. He was adapting, improvising, and using skills he'd been trained to apply flexibly. That kind of adaptability, that confidence to look at a problem and say, "We can fix this," is what made the American maintenance system work. The Germans could have learned this lesson. Some of their officers understood it, but their system was too committed to technical excellence and precision engineering to embrace the crude effectiveness of American methods. By the time they realized the cost of that choice, the war was already lost. So here's the final image to take away from this story. It's September 26, 1944, near Aricourt, France. A Sherman tank sits disabled in no man's land, transmission destroyed, exposed to enemy fire. 5 American soldiers refuse to abandon it. They work calmly, methodically under fire. 90 minutes later, the tank moves. The gun fires. The crew escapes. 700 yards away, a German tank commander watches through his periscope and realizes with cold certainty that his side is going to lose this war. Not because American tanks are better, they're not. But because American tank crews won't quit. American mechanics can fix anything. And American doctrine understands that the tank that keeps fighting beats the tank that doesn't. The Sherman was never the best tank in World War II, but it was always ready to fight. And in the end, that made all the difference.